necessary to convert this toy, you have your choice. You can either use a jack. It's a female 1/8 inch mono jack and wire. I use a thin gauge wire. This is 24 gauge audio cable. This is speaker wire. Or to save time, you could use this splitter. It's a mono headphone splitter, and what I do is I cut the male end off, leaving the two female ends, and that gives me enough to do two toys, and it saves me the trouble of soldering the wires onto the jack. But activated by one switch,
we need to rest up for our next big adventure.
so it'll be a matter of getting at the circuitry where the switch is located. So first thing is you shut the dial off. And some of the toys you can just remove the battery pack with the switch. The door dial is a little bit more difficult because it has a zip tie which is holding the fabric around this part of it. So you just carefully take a seam cutter and get at the zip tie itself. And once that is done, you can remove the heart of the dowel. This is a switch. And set the dowel aside, and this is what you're going to work on. There are 4 screws that are holding this assembly together. On this particular one, it's not necessary to remove the batteries, and you have the switch off, so we'll just go ahead and remove those screws. The screws are loose. You can carefully remove the cover, and I personally like to put all the screws in a safe place. I've been known to lose a few. Okay. The speaker acts as a button, or as a button activator. Here's the button that actually activates the dowel.
Let's dream of our next adventure.
So the thing to do, let's take these springs out. The thing normally that we have to do is try to determine where on the circuit board you need to access in order to bypass the switch. And a lot of times just a simple pair of jumper wires, and you can try different areas on the circuit board. Now this toy happens to be relatively easy because there we go, because there's a couple of spots on the circuit board. There's one there, there's one there that are already bare, that if I jumper between the two, it'll activate the toy. Now on some toys you have to get underneath the switch and kind of trace the path of the circuits and scratch a little bit of the insulation off the top to solder a wire to. Or you can take a tiny drill and drill a hole through where you want to put the wire and run the wires up from underneath. On this particular toy though, there's a plastic bracket underneath the circuit board which would make it a little bit difficult to run the wires up from underneath. So I think we'll be able to just solder the wires right onto these 2 points. Again, I hope you can see them okay. If we solder wires to these 2 points, what we're going to do is we're going to take this right here, and we're going to strip off, well, maybe a couple inches of insulation very carefully, because it's really thin wire. And then we'll attach the bare wire to those 2 points on the circuit board, and when the male end of the switch is plugged into here, you'll be able to adapt or to go ahead and activate the toy. Oftentimes, in order to get this to go through the case, you have to drill a hole. This particular toy, fortunately, has a notch already cut in it, and it happens to be just the perfect size. So we don't have to do any drilling. All we have to do is take the insulation off, attach the wires, and then reassemble it. When I'm working with this cable, I very carefully take an X-Acto knife and just barely cut through the insulation, because you'll see in a minute why it's important not to cut too deeply. Underneath this paper wrapping here, stranded wire, and that becomes one of your wires. So there's a single wire running up the middle, surrounded by the stranded wire. And what I do is I twist the stranded wire together, and then I take a soldering iron and I tin it so that the strands stay together and it becomes more secure. Now, if you use a different kind of a wire, this step won't be necessary, but I'm going to take some flux, which will draw the solder into the wire. And put some flux on the wire. I'm just doing that to hold the strands together so they don't unravel. Okay. The next step will be to feed the wires through underneath the circuit board and over the top so we can attach them to the 2 points. Put a drop of flux on each of the 2 contact points. And also some on the ends of the wires. Turn this around. Okay, now we'll do the next point. Plug this in and see if it works.
We need to rest up for our next
Okay.
big adventure.
I always take and wipe the flux off the circuit board.
Close your eyes and go to sleep.
Hold that wire. There are different ways to secure it. If I drill a hole, what I normally do is I'll take and wrap a narrow piece of tape multiple times around the wire so it can't pull through the hole. But I think when this is compressed on there, it's going to be a pretty tight fit, so I think that'll be fine. Okay, put the screws in and be ready to reassemble it. When reassembling the dowel, you have to remove the zip tie that you cut. And I have another one to replace it with, but when I have not had one available, I've used a piece of wire, just a thin gauge solid wire that I can loop through and twist it when I'm done, and it works just as well. Okay, after the dowel is completely reassembled, of course you've got this hanging out the back. And let's give it one more test just to make sure that it still works.
Of our next adventure. Now let's say good night and sleep tight. Good night. Buenas noches. We need to rest up
There it
for our
is.
next big adventure.
Okay, door is adapted.